Thank you for tuning in to the 2025 Weed Out Coordinator Training for Milwaukee County Parks. My name is Hallie Minzer, and I'm the Restoration Ecologist for the Milwaukee County Parks Natural Areas Program. New for this year, I've decided to break up this recording into several different modules to make specific content easier for you as a Weed Out Coordinator to access. So this first recording is going to be just the number one there, Introduction to the Milwaukee County Parks and Natural Areas. With that, I will jump right into the presentation. When any of our staff from Natural Areas is giving a presentation to the public, we always like to start by describing the ecology of the natural areas found within Milwaukee County Parks. We have over 10,000 acres that are considered natural areas. That is going to be the landscape that is not mowed, it's not turf, doesn't have concrete on it, not developed, that sort of thing. Doesn't include golf courses or disc golf courses. So it's a little bit easier to say what our natural areas are not than to encompass everything that they are. Our Milwaukee County Park System has 15,000 acres, so that means that 2/3 of it is natural areas. These natural areas are so vital because within Milwaukee County, 3/4 of the remaining green space is found within our park system. This, of course, is hugely important for the plant life and wildlife that is residing within these spaces. But then, of course, it's fundamentally important for us as humans, as park users, to enjoy this space. We have 3 state-designated natural areas within the park system, as well as 2 wetland gems that are designated by the Wisconsin Wetland Association. There are 85 miles of waterways, 51 ponds and lagoons, and well over 400 verified ephemeral wetlands. We are located right along Lake Michigan in Milwaukee County, right? And it is fantastic that within our park system there is 14 miles of shoreline along this Great Lake. This is phenomenal. If you go to other counties in the state or in Illinois that are bordering Lake Michigan like this, much more of that land is going to be privately owned. So the fact that we protect it, that we can have these natural areas exist along the lake and keep them from being developed is fundamental. And this is land, this is county land, so this is open to the public for all of us to enjoy. So this next term here, the southeast terminus of the ecological tension zone. This is a fancy way of saying that we in Milwaukee County are located where northern plant communities and southern plant communities converge and kind of this invisible diagonal line that bisects the county. And ultimately, this means that we get the best of both worlds with these northern and southern plant communities, so we get heightened biodiversity as a result of that. And then in Milwaukee County, in our parks, we have really just a huge variety of different habitats, many different types of woodlands, different types of grasslands, wetlands. Here's just a little snapshot of what some of those plant communities can look like. Many of our friends groups who are removing invasive species in the natural areas might find themselves in sort of a southern mesic forest or perhaps an oak woodland type of habitat that they're managing it, but how we manage all of these for our natural area staff and how we recommend that our volunteers manage this land is different, is unique, and it depends on the different types of habitat. This is one of my favorite slides, that infographic to the left. I believe that most folks out there who see Milwaukee County, and if we ask them to think about the nature in there, they are astounded to see these numbers and be able to visualize all of the different wildlife and plant life and plant communities that we have that are remaining and protected in Milwaukee County. Many people, it's just kind of their instinct to think, hey, it's such a developed urban center, there can't be that much that's still around, but that's just not the case. I encourage you to pause the video here to look at those numbers. These numbers are increasing each year for many of these taxa as we do more monitoring efforts. This slide, a little bit complicated, but can hopefully let you understand the structure of Milwaukee County Parks a bit more. So you can see with that subtle green outline for natural areas, that's the department that I fall under. We are separate from trails as well as forestry, and then the unit coordinators, the unit staff who are doing the mowing operations, that sort of thing. Forestry is kept mostly busy by removing the dead ash trees that unfortunately are succumbing to the emerald ash borer that has come through and killed many of those. So that's a lot of what forestry is doing, but they'll do some plantings and turf as well. We are separate from trails, which we used to be grouped together, natural areas and trails, but now those are separate divisions. And also, if you take a look to the left, we have our engagement team. I will point out specifically Danielle Polish is someone who you may have met already or might be meeting in the future. She has a background working with the natural areas and that kind of conservation and restoration background. So she is going to be someone to keep an eye out for in future weed outs that you might be hosting. Here's just a snapshot of some of the county ordinances that might apply to you as weed out coordinators and things to just keep an eye out for in your park. So planting and digging, of course, that's going to be very important. A permit's going to need to be required for any hole that's dug. And this often looks like if you're going to be planting, whether it's a tree or maybe some plugs for a pollinator garden, we're going to need to know this in advance so that Digger's Hotline, that you can call Digger's Hotline to make sure that there's not any buried utilities because we don't want anybody getting injured from them or causing costly damage. And then also I'm going to need a heads up over here for parks because I'll need to have our trades folks go out and survey any of the internal parks utilities as well. Now, so anytime the ground is disturbed, it's going to be necessary to call Digger's Hotline and do this protocol. And this could include activities such as using a parsnip predator to cut the taproot of invasive species. So something to keep an eye out for there. Finally, the second one on here, it's not permitted within our park system to harvest any plants as well as any mushrooms, any fungi. This is for reasons of safety. For one, we have a fair amount of contaminated soils in our park system, unfortunately, and we want to keep the public safe. This is also to protect our natural resources, which can be easily harvested with how many park users we have making use of the park system. So that is any collection or damage that is county ordinance that is not allowed to go on. And then dogs off leash is another big issue that I'll talk a little bit more on in a future slide. But for every dog off leash, park rangers are able to issue that citation that is currently $250.50. And that's for each individual off-leash dog, so that can certainly be a costly fine. We have 6 dog parks located throughout the county park system where you can legally, with the dog tag, go ahead and take them there. So please take them there, otherwise keep your dog on that 6-foot leash and in your control. Now that we've discussed our natural areas a little bit, let's go ahead and discuss the natural areas program that our staff is in charge of. Please feel free to pause the video here and take a look at that mission statement. But then what's always going on in the background, our thought process, here are our goals. Here's what we're really looking for when we're thinking about managing our natural areas. So of course we want to protect these high quality natural areas that exist. It's always going to be well worth the energy and time put into it when we start with the higher quality sites that have less invasive species coming in, that have more high quality native plants, that sort of thing. There's been less historical disturbance. Maybe some of these forests escaped farming for whatever reason, and so the soils aren't as beat up. So always starting with those areas is going to make more sense than trying to start with a highly degraded area and build it from the ground up. So protecting those high quality sites, really top of the list there for our goals. And of course, that blends into maintaining native plant and wildlife diversity and working to increase it whenever possible too. Of course, we want to reduce those negative impacts of invasive plant species. That brings us all here today. We want to provide passive recreation opportunities for the public, as well as science-based educational opportunities. And this idea here is that we want everybody to go out there and enjoy these beautiful green spaces that those who came before us were able to have the foresight to set aside. We want everybody to be enjoying the nature around them, ideally to get connected with it. If you can help us gather that information from wildlife monitoring programs, and then be advocates for these natural spaces so that we can keep them here for us and for future generations. And whenever possible, we want to have the opportunity to convert turf grass to natural areas. One example that comes to mind here for me is we have taken out some small portions of grass that gets bogged down and is very wet in spring. It just doesn't make sense for unit staff to mow some of these areas because their mowers can mess up the grass or sometimes get stuck. So we will go ahead and do a conversion of that to natural areas, to more natural habitat. We'll also go ahead and take agricultural fields out of rotation every year and reforest them, plant them into forest for the decades to come. The next few slides are just going to be some snapshots of what our natural areas teams, the type of activities that we do. So as restoration ecologist, invasive species removal restoration is a large part of my job. Each season, we manage over 3 dozen separate invasive species throughout the park system. We conduct native plantings and we collect native seed to disperse into our restoration areas. Last year, our tree planting along the Root River in 2024 was over 2,000 trees in 15 acres. And then we'll sometimes do pollinator gardens or plant plugs into certain restoration areas. That photo on the left there, I believe, is back from 2018, and that is staff installing a wet mesic prairie at Greenfield Park along the lagoon. I highly encourage you to go check this out. It's going to be on the south side of the lagoon. You can see it from the paved path there. So Greenfield Park, check it out. July, August, September is a lovely time to see those flowers in bloom. Vegetative mapping is a large part of our job as well. In order to manage invasive species and preserve rare natives, we need to know where they are, tracking those populations, those levels, the density, the general count of how much is out there, all of those sorts of things. Are these populations increasing? Are they decreasing? Just gathering that baseline data to be able to manage these plants in the plant communities. And that's another thing that we will map is we'll map canopy cover, which can come in handy, especially in our floodplain forest, for instance, where we're losing ash trees. We'll map the different community types, whether it might be, the southern mesic forest or oak woodland, and just get all of those mapping details out. Wildlife surveys are another important part of our job, certainly one of the favorites among our seasonal field techs who come to work for us during the year. But it's really important that we gather this baseline data for all these different types of wildlife. So let me just rattle off a few things here. We've got those odonate surveys, that's the dragonflies and damselflies. We'll do nighttime surveys where we'll do bat monitoring as well as moth monitoring and whatever other nocturnal invertebrates are coming to those black lights at that time of night. The butterfly monitoring program, bumblebee monitoring, Bird surveys are a big one that we've been doing for many, many years now. We do wetland monitoring programs as well and nest box monitoring. So all kinds of information so that we can track these wildlife populations to help inform our land management practices. In community science, there's a large amount of overlap with wildlife monitoring there, but also some other programs like native seed collection. And finally, we're going to gather all of this information. This is really crucial information that we'll put together to create ecological restoration management plans, these land management plans for our different parks. So we're gathering all of that historical information, the different maps that we've created to get the lay of the land, so to speak, and everything gets compiled together so that we can come up with thoughtful, practical 10-year management activities to protect and restore these lands. I'll put in a plug here. For the first time ever in 2024, we created a natural areas strategic plan. If you want to go ahead and check this out, you can go to the Milwaukee County Parks website and then click on the conservation tab and you will see this. It's divided up into a few different PDFs because it's such a large document. But if you are interested in the thought that goes on in the background for how we are managing our natural areas as a whole, go ahead and check that out. This is a new slide that I've included for 2025. Our AOC projects, and that's area of concern, because we're going to go ahead and see more of this work happening in the future. Basically, these are sites that have been designated as contaminated by historical processes, industrial processes, those sort of things, and they have what are known as these legacy pollutants. We have a handful of sites in Milwaukee County Parks that have this AOC designation, and ultimately the goal is to be off this list. You do not want to be on this list. So in order to clean up these sites for us, there's two basic ways to go about it, and those focuses are on habitat restoration as well as enhancement for wildlife. So you can see by the time all of these projects are done, that's going to have a huge impact on our park system with those sites covering roughly 1,800 acres. That's close to 1/5 of the park system's natural areas, so a huge impact there. If you're familiar with the Little Menominee River Parkway and some of the work that's going on there, you might have seen a huge change. That's something that our staff has been working on a portion there to remove invasive species and restore habitat for wildlife. And then contractors have been working on it too. So this is going to be basically north of Appleton and south of Good Hope Road, roughly along the Little Menominee River Parkway. And you would have seen in the last few years a wall of buckthorn that got removed. It got forestry mowed by contractors for most of it. So now you've got this big open area. There are going to be trees planted into it and other habitat management activities. So if you saw that, you probably noticed a huge change in the landscape there. And we're going to be seeing this happen along a couple of our other parkway sections, the Menominee and the Milwaukee River Parkways, as well as these parks as well. So I included this just to have folks be aware of that, whether these are parks that you frequent, or they might even be the parks that you are working in specifically with your friends group for these weed outs. In order to address the threats to our natural areas, we have to be aware of them, right? So of course, being in Milwaukee County, it's such a developed area. We've got habitat fragmentation and urban development. Climate change, of course, can be a problem for our natural areas as we're seeing more and more. One thing that natural areas is doing to go ahead and kind of fight back against climate change is in our tree plantings, roughly 1 in 5 of the trees that we plant are considered climate change species. These are species of trees and shrubs that are going to have their native range be a little bit further south than here in Milwaukee County that can still survive the type of winters that we get here, right, and the climate conditions. But we are doing this in order to anticipate a general warming in our region and different climatic factors, but we want to increase the species diversity of trees and shrubs that we have here, because if something were to happen to one or a couple of our native species and they winked out here, ideally we would have some replacement species that could hopefully fill in those niches so that we just don't have a gap in the canopy and of habitat type that animal species and other plant species would be making use of. Encroachments are a threat that our planning team and our natural areas team at parks are working to tackle because we have so many natural areas throughout the park system, and many of them are in close proximity to private property. Of course, we see that neighboring landowners are encroaching, whether that's intentional or unintentional. We are going ahead and making everyone aware of that and removing those encroachments so that we can have these natural areas be restored. As I mentioned earlier, illegal collecting of certain species is a threat to our natural areas. It is very damaging. So that is a picture of wild leeks right there, also known as ramps in the culinary world. And these have gone locally extinct. They've been extirpated from certain sites within our park system because people have dug them up and they've completely disappeared. This species that can be so heartbreaking for, because to go from seed to mature plant can take 7 years up to 10 years. So you can see how easily those can disappear from the landscape if you have even a few unscrupulous individuals going out and collecting a bunch. And maybe some of them, they aren't aware, but we're working to get the word out so that individuals know, hey, these plants are protected by county ordinance. You're not allowed to harvest them. Off-leash dogs, as I mentioned briefly before, they're a threat to our natural areas. They can be a threat to the safety of other parks users and their pets, of course, but they can cause conflict with coyotes. They can spread invasive species with their fur, right, when they go off trail. And another issue that they can cause is for ground nesting species of birds. If dogs are running around during their nesting season for these ground nesting birds, the birds can readily abandon the nests, and they might choose not to come back to this site for nesting in future seasons. And we've seen this happen for some of our parks where bird species that used to nest here have gone away, and we've lost those species, unfortunately. Feral cats are another huge issue to our natural areas. In other countries, cats have caused multiple species of birds to go extinct from hunting. And a conservative estimate for how many birds are killed by feral cats in the United States alone each year is 1 billion birds. And that's the low end of it. It could be up to 3-something billion birds. So, huge issue there. If you can, please, I encourage you, keep your pets indoors. It's safer for them. It's going to protect our wildlife. The sad thing about this too is oftentimes the cats aren't doing it to feed themselves. They're doing it because of their predatory instinct drive to keep those killing skills sharp, and they'll kill the bird and just let it sit. Deer, as beloved as they are by many park users, are a big threat to our natural areas, and they are one of the biggest currently unmanaged threats within our park system. Now, why is that? Why are deer so bad? They are causing excessive browse damage to our native species. We had a study conducted in our parks a number of years ago, and the vast majority of those parks were designated as high browse level from deer or excessive browse level. And that just means that we're not seeing the regeneration of many of our native species that we should be seeing. And species are beneficial native species are disappearing, or their populations are becoming extremely limited because these deer are just gobbling them all up. I've heard them described as walking stomachs, and it's absolutely true. To put kind of a more concrete picture on this, look to the symbol to the top right there. That's the white oak leaf, the symbol of our park system, the white oak. And you see the oak tree right here that this deer in the photo is about to be browsing on here. But we are seeing oak regeneration really struggling and just not happening in many of our parks, and that's because deer love browsing on oaks. So these mature trees that we see, these multiple couple 100-year-old trees, they're still dropping these acorns and trying to get these baby oaks growing, but the deer are eating up all the saplings before they can reach that 6-foot level deer browse height where they're safe from the deer. If we don't tackle this issue, we're not going to be able to save a lot of our oak forests. And of course, what brings us here today, invasive species, of course, are a big threat to our natural areas, as we will discuss. I'm not going to go ahead and read all this at you, but please feel free to pause the video to look at these numbers here, just really emphasizing how damaging invasive species are on the landscape. And then right here, so there's really 3 groups all working together to make this weed out partnership successful. So I like to think of it as a 3-legged stool. We've got Milwaukee County Parks, we've got the park people, the nonprofit there, and then we've got all of you as weed out volunteers, as weed out coordinators. There is the contact information and that little star bubble thing if you need to reach out to the park people director right there, currently Dana Hansen. But otherwise, this was written by somebody other than me, but I really like the wording, so this one I would like to read out loud. The presence of invasive species creates a cascade of effects that ripple throughout the ecosystem, disrupting the sustainable balance of nature. When weed out volunteers come together with natural area staff, as well as the park people, we can interrupt those effects to restore ecosystem functions together. Now, I know some of the slides that I had shown previously, they can be a bit of a downer. There are a lot of threats, but there is absolutely reason for hope. And I have seen so much successful work being done by all of you as volunteers. You're very dedicated to helping remove invasive species in the park system and in your individual parks, and it really does make a difference. This slide I included 1 or 2 years ago just to really solidify the differences in the roles that we at Milwaukee County Parks have and distinguish them between what the park people do. So over here at Parks, as restoration ecologist, I host the 2 weed out trainings, the spring and the fall. I provide information on the best ways to go about controlling those invasive species. Then I'll work with you to conduct site visits to go over logistics and a specific plan of attack for the invasive species in your park, what's going to work best for you, your friends group, and then set those priority areas for removing those invasive plants. Milwaukee County Parks does require from anybody volunteering that they complete a volunteer waiver. That's once per year. And then I'll go ahead and make recommendations for and approve planting lists if and when you get to that stage for your park. Now moving over to the right side for the park people, they're responsible for recruiting and supporting friends groups, raising those funds for the supplies, and then providing those supplies and tools. And then they potentially can reimburse weed out coordinators for pesticide applicator certification. This is something you'll want to reach out to the director of the park people in advance to make sure that you qualify. This is going to be for friends groups that are under the park people umbrella, that they should be able to qualify, but just reach out to her beforehand if you plan on wanting to get reimbursement for that pesticide applicator certification fee. And with that, that is the end of this first presentation. And please join me for the next module. Thank you very much.